Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 2024 EB-5 Year in Review with Bernie and Manuel. I'm going to introduce Bernie first, who is the managing partner of WR Immigration, a firm renowned for its exceptional client service. He is a recognized leader in immigration law and has been a driving force in corporate global mobility with a specialization in business and investment visas. Mr. Wolfsdorf brings over 25 years of experience and is a certified specialist in immigration and nationality law by the California State Bar. He has played a pivotal role in shaping the current immigration landscape, notably through his involvement with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, also known as AILA, where he served as national president and contributed to key committees, including the EB-5 Investor Committee. His contributions have earned him multiple accolades, including the Service Excellence Award from AILA and top rankings from Best Lawyers, Chambers and Partners, and Super Lawyers. He is joined by our very own Manuel Ortiz, who serves as FPP's Vice President of Global Business Development. With over 20 years of experience in both public and private sectors, he brings extensive expertise in global and domestic finance markets. Mr. Ortiz has led award-winning investor relations teams, raising in excess of 500 million USD in capital from investors across 40 countries. His efforts in emerging markets have earned him a National Industry Award for bringing EB-5 services and educational resources to underserved regions worldwide. Known for his strong communication and cultural competency, Mr. Ortiz has built trusted relationships with institutional investors, family offices, hedge funds, and intermediaries. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and Manuel Ortiz. I'm Bernie Wolfsdorf, the managing partner of Wolfsdorf Rosenthal. We are an immigration law firm with 10 offices and almost 200 staff. We have processed over 5,000 EB-5 cases, and I'm going to share a little brag with you, if you don't mind. We filed over 600 526Es last year and over 400 829s, and we went over 1,000 visa cases filed, that is EB-5 visa cases filed last year. It was a bumper year, an exciting year, and quite frankly, we haven't had so much activity and excitement since I have to go back probably 10 years, 2015 and 16. So 2024 was an absolutely amazing year for our firm and for EB-5 and for the industry generally.
Well, thank you, Bernie, for that. I just want to roll right into visa capacity, especially as it concerns to 2024, and just ask you, what trends did you notice in visa allocation and processing?
So, look, the biggest and most exciting aspect of the new EB-5 RIA law, that's Reform and Integrity Act, signed March 2022, is that it allows for concurrent filing. Now, previously, you had to have your 526 petition approved by U.S. immigration before you could get any benefit. And there's basically two ways to apply for the green card. One is to apply overseas at a consulate abroad. And now, for the first time, under this new law, concurrent filing was allowed. That means people in the United States on a student visa, for example, or H-1B, or student visa OPT, optional practical training, those guys can file in the United States their 526 and file an adjustment of status. And here's the best part. They get a 5-year unrestricted work authorization, 5-year advance parole travel permit, and these interim benefits are literally driving the program through the roof. And the reason being is, let's assume that you're born in India. The green card waiting line for an individual born in India, let's take a Stanford master's degree graduate from India in computer science working for Google or Meta. How long is the waiting line for a green card? Let's try 20 plus years. It's nuts. It's crazy. So these people are in the US on H-1Bs, and unless there's a good faith marriage to an American citizen, the only door open at the present time for an Indian national, again, if they married, they're not going to be marrying a US citizen. The only door currently open is EB-5. And many of these guys have been here for years, extremely well educated, senior positions at tech companies, and they on H-1Bs. When their kids turn 21, bingo, they're out. So the only way to do age freezing in the US is concurrent filing EB-5. And quite frankly, our phone is ringing off the hook on these cases. We are literally, my partner Joey Barnett and I, who work together, he's doing 5 or 6 consultations a day on this particular class of individual. Now, in addition to the Indian nationals, of course, the Chinese nationals have constituted over 50% of the applicants, probably closer to 60, maybe even higher. Now, there are 250,000 Chinese students in the US. And green card processing through employment is going to take 6 to 8 years. So they're in a big dilemma. But if they do concurrent filing now and they get their work permit and their travel permit, they can open businesses. They can work wherever, change their jobs from one employer to the other, or study or go to medical school, basically live the American dream. And that processing takes about 3 or 4 months to get this work permit and travel permit. But here's the rub. Here's the scary part. This program has been so successful. Word has got out. And literally at this point, I can safely say that the number of cases filed in the set-aside reserved categories, that's rural, high unemployment, maybe infrastructure still open, but it's only 2%. But the 32% of set-asides priority processing visas under the new category is oversold. It's already oversold based on the number of people who filed. But there is some good news. And the good news is, because the US government has been so slow in processing, we have a window of opportunity to do concurrent filing. Now, we don't know how long that window is, but we've had 2 warnings from the State Department. In the January 2025 visa bulletin, the State Department specifically warned us in writing that there has been such heavy demand that they will have to establish a final action date. What's the other word for final action date? Cutoff date. What's the third explanation for final action date? No more concurrent filing. And when this happens, quite frankly, the industry is going to slow down, because this opportunity to do concurrent filing is going to disappear. But we have a window of opportunity, and I'm going to keep repeating that phrase. We have a narrow window of opportunity, and nobody knows what it is exactly. Now, we got a second warning in the February visa bulletin. And for those of you not familiar with the visa bulletin is published every month by the US Department of State. Just go to visa bulletin, Google the term, and you will see a chart, quite a complex chart, which regulates the number of visas available in each category. So if you're interested in a green card and you don't know how to read the visa bulletin, well, that's like driving with a blindfold. You don't know where you're going. So it's very important to understand the visa bulletin. And in the February visa bulletin, the EB-5 category date for filing, or what I call Chart B to make it simple, is closed. Concurrent EB-5 filing under Chart B date for filing is closed effective February 1, 2025. This is the second warning shot from the US government. But the good news, Chart A, which is the final action date, which can be used for concurrent filing, remains open for February. Now, I know this probably sounds like I'm talking a foreign language here with all this date for filing and final action date, but I'm sorry. Let's make it simple. You've got Chart A, which is for issuance of visas, and you've got Chart B, which is the government telling you to get ready to file. And Chart B is closed already for concurrent filing. Chart A remains open. So for the third time, we have a window of opportunity in the month of February, March, April. This thing could close by May, or it could close by June, or it could close by August. And realistically, for most investors, it takes a few months to get all the money together, transfer the funds. We've got to do what we call source of funds report on where the money comes in. I know you guys at First Pathways, you've got your projects ready. You've got all your documents ready. So there's no problem from the project point of view. And you guys have been in the business for what, 20 years? You're like, I think
Since 2008.
2008. Wow. You guys are like probably one of the first regional centers, one of the most respected. You've been established. You know how to do your side of it, which is get the project side. So, you know, EB-5, what is EB-5 for the new people? Well, there's two things. Thing number one is you've got to select a project, which is, quite frankly, the most important part. And then part two is the visa part, the immigration part, where we do the source of funds and we put the two together, the project documents, the source of funds documents, and then if you're lawfully in the United States, we can do this concurrent filing. And the warning that I'm giving everybody is the reason this program has been so popular is all these people in the United States have been able to file adjustment of status and get interim benefits. For the people abroad, there's also good news. We're starting to finally get interviews scheduled for RIA cases. And if we're talking about trends, and I'll cover 24 and 25, is 24 was a little bit frustrating because they weren't scheduling RIA green card interviews abroad, other than a handful. Now they're starting to move on those. And in the US, they're starting to approve the adjustments of status. So not only are these people getting their interim work cards and travel cards, but they're also getting their green cards. And the market for concurrent filing in the US is primarily focused on these two groups, Chinese and Indian, and together there's almost 600,000 international students, and a certain percentage of them want to stay and work and live the American dream. And this is a pathway. Pardon my choice of adjective, but this is the pathway to getting your green card, living the American dream. And as I explained to everybody, I'd love to say that I'm the most important part of the process, but I'm not. You're the most important part of the process, which is the project, because the project has to create jobs and the project has to return capital. and you guys have years of experience with project selection. And, obviously that's why I'm doing this podcast with you guys. I feel comfortable that you guys know what you're doing and are able to look after your clients, which is your investors. We love handling the immigration side of it. Sorry for those long answers there, but I have a problem with my jaw. It just keeps going.
I think you did a great job, Bernie. And I want to emphasize one thing that you touched on that I think is super important is the power of EB-5 for people that are already here. Take the example of the college student. You're here, you've worked very hard to get great grades, 4 years, finish at the top of your class, and now what do I do? Now you have to wait for an H-1B, figure that out. Even if you find an employer that's willing to sponsor you, it's not a guaranteed shot either, right? So the power of EB-5 that you have right now with a concurrent filing is you're liberated, you can work wherever you want, and you have that peace of mind. And I think what you're saying here is that that's not going to be available in perpetuity.
This is correct. So you've really hit the nail on the head. The H-1B statistic last year for bachelor's degree was 28%. So, you had less than 30%. With the master's degrees, the statistic was slightly higher, probably around 35%. So you basically have a 30% chance, if you're a well-qualified professional, you have an employer, of being selected in the H-1B lottery. That's terrible. And STEM students have been able to get up to 3 years of work authorization if the employer is E-verified. But the new administration, and I'm not going to get into the weeds so much on the new administration, but they have been clear that they do not support OPT and curricular practical training. And they also want to make changes to the H-1B program. So if you have concerns about the new administration's view on legal immigration, we are expecting to see restrictions on F1 student work authorization, more restrictions on the H-1B program, and this narrow window to avoid having to deal with those occurrences. So I'm not getting into the politics of this, but the facts are very clear. If you're in the US on an F1 or even on an H-1B and you want to move to a green card, this is the program for you. But of course, there's this issue of, do I have $800,000? Are my parents ready to commit that sort of capital? Can we prove the legal source of funds? But if you're amongst that group of people that have this capital or can raise this capital through lawful means, the EB-5 program is probably the right program for you.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, as long as we're discussing some trends with the new administration, do you think that there's a potential for permanent reauthorization for EB-5?
Well, let's put it this way. I'll start off with the negative news, and I'll switch to the positive news. The truth is, the Trump administration, this is not President Trump's first time round, right? We got 45 and we got 47. In 45, we were optimistic that Trump would fix the issues we had with the EB-5 program. It didn't happen. So that was a bit of a disappointment, to be direct. However, I have now heard from what I'm going to call reliable sources, more than one, separately, that they are interested in fixing this program. And I am strangely optimistic that the new administration will do something that we've been working on for a long time. This was a bipartisan program initially introduced by Republican President Bush, that's Bush Sr., in 1990. And it had broad support. And if you look at the congressional record, it clearly talks about 10,000 investors. But what do we get? The way the statute's been interpreted incorrectly is we get about 3,500 investors every year. And that's what's caused the waiting line. But my hope is that President Trump is going to listen to this podcast, or at least his people will, and issue an executive order that corrects this mistake. The administrations have got this wrong, and this is an opportunity for President Trump to fix it. Issue an executive order to the administration to issue visas to up to 10,000 investors and their children, and not count their 3-year-old or 5-year-old child as an investor. So I think there was a misinterpretation here that could be corrected by an executive order based on the current statute. And if this happens, let's stop and think for a second. What does this program do? It's a jobs program. You've got to create 10 direct or indirect jobs, or maybe a combination now under the new rules. You create direct and indirect jobs. What does America want and need? Good, high-quality jobs. And this program brings it. So, I hope that Congress listens, Congress interprets this correctly. And the reality is, my math is not good, which is why I'm a lawyer, but I believe the program brought in over $5 billion just last year alone. Now, I'm sitting here in California, and just down the road, the city of Palisades burned. This needs to be rebuilt. This is an emergency situation. Now, we could use taxpayer funds, or we could use EB-5. The nice thing about EB-5 is it doesn't cost the taxpayer $1, not $1 of taxpayer fund. And if we're using this for what are clear emergencies, fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, Manuel, I think you used the phrase national interest projects. And this could be in rural areas, high unemployment areas, infrastructure projects. This is a wonderful opportunity for the administration to create good, well-paying jobs for American workers at no cost to the taxpayer. What's a better deal for America? If we're talking America First, which is the official visa policy of the new administration, America First, well, I don't have a problem with it, quite frankly. Why not? The immigrants, and these are relatively small numbers. We're not talking about the millions of people coming in through other programs. And I don't want to get political today. But at the end of the day, this is a few thousand immigrants creating jobs, bringing capital, helping to build and rebuild America with good jobs. And I think the administration will be sympathetic to the cause here, because what's the downside? I don't see it.
I agree with you completely, Bernie. And I think that the other thing that we had talked about as well is that one thing is the rebuilding process, right? That's one thing. But the other part of it too is that there are infrastructure needs that are in California as well that could help prevent the next one, and what the reaction time is and how you react to things, right? So there's an infrastructure angle there as well. And EB-5 could be a major solution and a huge benefit to the region and to the country as well.
Well, building reservoirs, there's always, every time we have a fire, there's not enough water, right? So, how hard is it to build reservoirs? We're going to have more fires. That's unavoidable. I'm not talking about climate change here. I'm just talking that fires have become a reality and have been for many years. And we need to address them. And the EB-5 program would be a perfect program to raise the necessary capital, federal, state, and local level. And I think the program could be expanded to greatly benefit the United States.
Yeah. So speaking of building and jobs, I want to give Manny a chance to jump in here because I'd like his insights on projects. How do you think market conditions influenced project structures? Maybe you want to talk about some of the nuances associated with these projects or market conditions, and maybe some of the key factors that investors should prioritize when choosing a project as well.
You go back to, let's look at 2022. And when EB-5 opened back up with the RIA, and you see what happened in 2022, that rural became the buzzword, but there were no rural projects, and everybody was going out and looking for them. And we were no different. For us, it took us about 2 years to find a quality rural project, because whenever you're in these rural areas where the populations are below 25,000 outside of an MSA, finding things that have value in these areas is very challenging. You can find deals, but finding projects that protect the investors on the immigration side and the investment side is very hard. And so when you start getting into, let's say, July, August of 2022, then you start to see a bit of a flood of rural projects, and they started coming out. I think at that time, you also had high interest rates as well. Oftentimes, when people look at EB-5 and the project side, they focus on, is this mezzanine debt? Is it a senior loan? Is it equity? But what typically will drive the type of project that it is where interest rates, right? If you have high interest rates, you're typically going to have more senior loan EB-5 projects. And that's similar to the dynamic that you see with private lending. It's no different here. And so right now we're at a point where interest rates are still relatively high. You've seen the industry shift to more senior loan type projects that, if you looked at when EB-5 first opened back up in 2022, there weren't that many of those. Now you see more. Now, from an investor perspective is, well, if we have the senior loan, that means that we have priority repayment, then we're in great line to get our money back. But the reality of it is, whether you get your money back or not, that depends on the asset that you're invested in. Because if that thing isn't worth anything, you're not going to get anything back, right? So when investors are actually looking at investments, it's very important for them to qualify an EB-5 investment, both from the investment side and the immigration side. One of them is going to get your money back, and the other one's going to get you your permanent green card. I oftentimes say that private equity investment, whether it's private placements or just regular real estate deals, those are typically going to be a little bit easier to evaluate than an EB-5 deal, where you've got immigration aspects of it, political currents, a whole bunch of other things that you have to take into consideration. So the job of an EB-5 investor isn't easy. But when you look at these projects, they have to be strong on both components. And I think as an industry, from an education perspective, I think it's also very important on the investment side to have educational materials to help investors make qualified investment decisions, not whether a project has started construction, because that does you no good in getting your money back, because the reality of it is many bad projects started construction at some point as well, right? So it's really looking at, how am I protected? What is this asset worth? Are there any additional guarantees that the developers signed up on to protect my investment? On the immigration side, project starting construction is important because that's a primary driver for job creation. That's important, but it's important to understand that an EB-5 project has 2 tracks working in parallel, independent of each other: the investment track and also the immigration track.
So, Manuel, you say it so clearly. I like to put it this way to clients. You've got to do project due diligence. And simplistically, there's 2 issues. Firstly, let's understand the law. The law requires there to be an investment at risk. At risk means the possibility of earning money or losing money. So that is the legal requirement, bottom line of everything. And finding a regional center and finding a project which minimizes that risk, and I think that's what you were talking about, is that out in the rural area, it's harder to find a project where they're going to get their money back. And of course, there's the issue of the project actually moving forward, because the project doesn't move forward, jobs don't get created. Now I got a problem. So I don't deal with the financial aspect. That's not my job. I'm the visa boy. I deal with job creation. But you know what? I have seen clients make mistakes. Sometimes they go for these glitzy projects with fancy brochures without looking at the track record of the regional center, without doing appropriate due diligence, without properly evaluating the capital stack to make sure that there is an appropriate exit strategy. I know you guys have been doing this for decades, and I've had the privilege of knowing you and working with you, Manny, for a long, long time, many, many years. And I know that you have a lot of experience in structuring these projects correctly so that the investor can get their money back. So one thing I want to talk about as well, and just explain, why had the market from China and India gone towards the rural category? And the answer is simple. So the RIA, the Reform and Integrity Act, sets aside 32% of the total annual visa allocation of approximately 10,000. So it's a few thousand only. And 20% of the set-asides, or 20% of the entire EB-5 allocation goes to rural, where high unemployment only gets 10%. So for that reason, there's sort of been a surge of interest on the rural for Chinese and Indian applicants, but very often the high unemployment provide more security. So maybe you'll get your visa or green card a little bit quicker if you're from China or India, but then comes that important question of which one's better for getting my money back. So ideally, of course, you know, you want a project where you can get a fast green card and get your money back. But generally, and I think you spoke about this, Manuel, is the fact that it's often easier to structure a high unemployment deal in terms of getting your money back at the end of the investment. So just giving you the perspective of an immigration lawyer on these issues, which is, again, it's not my job to be involved in project selection, because we're not financial due diligence, we're visa people. But I do tell people, please make sure you don't make a decision on the glitzy brochure. Look at the track record, evaluate who these people are, understand the capital stack, and be comfortable that you're going to get your money back as well as get your green card. And in order to get your green card, that money has to be spent on job creation as a general rule, and the jobs, direct or indirect, actually created. So that's the big issue for me. But then the big issue on the project is when and how will I get my money back at the appropriate time?
Bernie, one other thing that I've noticed that is a trend now is maybe if you could talk a little bit about the project approval and how important that is. I think people have now started to look at projects getting denied a little bit more than before. And then also another thing is that if you have a project that's approved that also has some conditional green cards issues or I-526 is approved, does that also translate to new investors coming in also getting faster processing times, or is it pretty random and we just can't predict what USCIS
well, thank
is
you.
going to do?
I'm glad you raised that one, because the difference between RIA and the old regime, the pre-RIA, before 2022, you kind of were in a little bit of a limbo. Yeah, they had something called deference, but now they created a new framework, which is actually another major improvement. This is the 956F. Now, you can actually file your concurrent filing without the 956F project approval. You can. But if that project is rejected, you could find yourself what I'm going to call high and dry, unless you maintained your underlying underlying student or H-1B status. So the wonderful thing about the current program is that it's a separate filing. You file your 956F. Once the government approves it, absent material change, you now completely safe as to obtaining your immigration benefits. So going for a project where you've got a 956F approval leaves the possibly the most important part resolved. And the only issue from my perspective is the source of funds, money clean, traceable, and is the foreign national admissible to the United States, meaning they're not a bad guy with criminal conviction, etc. So bottom line, Manuel, as you mentioned, having the 956F approval removes the question of project risk. And the only issue from an immigration perspective is showing that the money is clean and the individual is, I'll just use the word clean as well. No criminal background, etc. So this is really another incredibly valuable and important improvement in the EB-5 program. And I'm this eternal optimist that Congress and or the administration are going to make further improvements to this program because it just makes sense at the end of the day. It's not a new program. This was enacted in 1990. It's got a track record. And look, I know, and you know, that a lot of the early players in this were a little bit too creative in some respects. That's why I always say, please be careful of some of the new regional centers that don't have a track record. There's a lot of projects on the market. I got to be honest with you. I've seen some. I've had to hold my nose when I go near them. So, you know, be careful which project. Those projects that promise too much. Oh, we're going to promise you this gigantic big return on capital. I say walk away. You know, is the old thing they teach you. If the Rolex watch is being sold for $10, it's either stolen, broken, or it's not a Rolex. So, you know, be careful if the deal looks too good. The best projects, it's just the reality of this industry, pay very small interest returns. It's all about getting your capital back. Capital preservation, not, if you're looking at EB-5 as a way to make money, I'm going to say, keep looking. This is not a way to make money. And if you like gambling, go for crypto. Go buy your coins. You're going to have a lot of fun. You'll get addicted to it, but you may also lose your money. EB-5, go for the solid projects.
You're exactly right, Bernie. And I think that EB-5 is actually an investment strategy from the perspective of conservation of capital. That should be your goal coming into this. That's also traditionally an investment strategy. Not everybody is investing into things just to get high returns. If you go into it with a mentality of conservation of capital, that's great. And the reality of it is that investors from across the globe come from countries that might at some point have some form of a currency devaluation. And the idea is that if you're invested in the US, hopefully the value of your currency is going to be maintained. And again, you go back to that conservation of capital play.
Well, you may notice I have an accent. I'm from South Africa initially. And when I left South Africa, the rand was worth $1.15. Today, it's worth about 15 cents. So if you had invested, well, that was a long time I left. But the bottom line is that this point, this currency swing thing, the fact is the dollar has been incredibly strong. And as a way to benefit through the currency swing has been very real for a lot of countries. People who invested were able to be pretty sure that their money is secure based on the strong dollar and the ability to get your capital back, which, had it been left abroad, could be worth a whole lot less. So, yeah, that's a positive worth looking at.
So what I've seen in the trends of where things are going, and if I were to look at my tea leaves, all you have to do is look back to the past. You see these cycles of markets and visa capacities becoming an issue. And I think we're going to see that happen as we progress through the year. You mentioned that the window of opportunity is here for only so long. And what ends up happening is demand starts shifting to emerging markets. Back in 2015, 2017 window, well, I was one of the first people in India, in Mexico, in countries in South America that where nobody was. And we did a really good job. And now I feel you're going to have these markets a little bit more developed than you have before, certainly since back then. You know, it's been 10 years. And the projects are also going to change because you're also going to see a shift in interest rates. So as interest rates go down, you're probably going to see more mezzanine, pref equity type investments. You might not see as many senior projects. The market will shift, I think, to Latin America. If you look at Latin America as a whole, there is quite a bit of volume there looking at it as a whole, but every country is going to be different. And so having the cultural competence and understanding and being able to service these investors as they go through the process with their families to achieve the American dream is going to be more and more important. Nobody likes, and I'll tell you specifically in these markets, Bernie, that hey, great, these other countries shut down, now we're here. You really have to have a long-term strategy and relationship building and building trust and track record and all of those things, because it's even more important in those markets.
So let me share my view on what I'm seeing trends in the market and what I expect for next year. So I already bragged that we filed over 5,000 cases. That's factual. So we have some idea of where the market has been, and we get some idea of where we think it's going to go. So at least for me, China has been number one. We've been very China focused. I think I did 6 or 7 trips to China last year. China was clearly number one in terms of case filings. India was a clear number 2 and continues to be, as more wealth is created in India. It's interesting, for example, we now have over 300,000 Indian students in the US as opposed to about 250,000 Chinese. The Indians have taken over in terms of the number of international students. So those two groups have been primary and dominant. Now, there are 2 or 3 other countries. For example, Vietnam has been very strong for us in the past, but Vietnam was slow last year. Mm-hmm. And the other one, Korea, has been reasonably strong in the past, but slow last year. They had a banking crisis. There were issues in Vietnam. We are now seeing a significant surge and comeback from Vietnam. At one point was actually number 1 in this program. So Vietnam's coming back strong, the Vietnamese nationals. Korea's coming back strong. There's some political issues there, which we won't get into, but coming back strong. Hong Kong, Taiwan, some concerns and frustrations have also been quite strong. So from an Asian point of view, but then, you know, we talk about ROW, rest of the world. Quite frankly, you know, we do cases for Europeans, people from UK, Germany, France, Canada. You know, there are a lot of people who immigrated to Canada from China or India. And, you know, I love Canada, but they see more opportunity in the US. So now they're re-immigrating, as it were, you know, Indian, Chinese nationals who moved there, for example. South America, I think Brazil's coming back up quite strong. The numbers are, again, starting to show, and then a variety of countries in South America. So quite frankly, when you look at this program, you have to have a global perspective. I mentioned earlier, I'm from South Africa. You know, something nice, because I'm partisan. I love Africa. If you visit, you'll love Africa too. We have a lot of problems. One of my friends said we have more problems before 8 o'clock in the morning than you Americans have all day. And all you guys do is complain. We don't complain. I really like that one. But South Africa was a moderately strong market. It was top 10 at one point. Because of the exchange rate, it's dropped and its market hasn't been that active. But Nigeria has been quite strong. And other countries in Africa, there's also interest. Egypt, for example, has been a little bit of a market. So I think from a marketing point of view and a trend, it's really a global program, worldwide program. I think, however, you'll continue to see the majority of investors come from 5 or 6 countries that I've mentioned: China, India, Vietnam, Korea, Taiwan,
In Taiwan.
Hong Kong. Those, I think, are your big ones, but there's going to be a smattering of other countries in your top 10. So all I can say is I hope that if you choose First Pathways as your project and regional center, that we will have the opportunity. That is WR Immigration, Bernie Wolfsdorf, my partner Joey Barnett, works with you folks a lot. We'd be thrilled to have the opportunity to help you live the American dream. So, which I consider myself as having been one of the lucky ones. So thank you, Manuel, for inviting me. Thank you, team. First Pathways, I wish you a pleasant, successful 2025 and love to do this again sometime.
Yes,
Hey, thank you so much, Bernie. Really good being with you as always.
Yes, we certainly will do it again sometime. Yeah, I just want to thank you guys again for joining me. And if anybody has any questions, I implore you to reach out to Manny or Bernie, whose contact info will be included in the description.
Thank you so much. Look forward to it, folks, and anticipating a wonderful 2025.